Hey guys, this is Carlos Phoenix in the Artist Alley Show. Today's special guest is Kirk Lindo. We're going to talk to him about his background, his present, and his future. He's got some projects coming up that you may want to collect, and he's also going to tell us about how he went from traditional comic books to digital. Don't miss a minute, and thank you very much for watching. Hey guys, and thank you very much for coming back. And this is Carlos Phoenix with the Artist Alley, and I got our special guest, Kirk Lindo. Kirk Lindo, thank you so much for coming to the show and sharing some of your background experiences and projects with us. So where are you now?
I'm in my studio.
And where's that located?
Room at the other end of my house. And
I meant like state.
Exactly. It's at the exact opposite end of my house from my bedroom, so that when I'm up here working late at night, that I don't disturb my wife and my daughter.
That's cool. Okay. All right. Well, Kirk, so let's go a little bit over some of the projects that you've been working on and that you'll be launching soon.
Well, the main project that I'm working on is my Sword of the Apocalypse graphic novel. It stars my most famous character, the character I'm most well known for, which is the vampiress Luxura. She first appeared in my vampire anthology that I launched in about the mid-90s, around 1994, called Vampirotica. And she was the main character. She's the character that you see on all the covers. And she's the main one that I introduced there. And we published the comic for about 50 issues, plus a bunch of spin-off miniseries. Mm-hmm. And I was pretty active from about 1994 till I'd say about 2004. Then I took a break from comics, should I say from actively publishing. And then sometime around 2009, my eldest son and I got together and we're talking about ideas for a new Luxura book, and we came up with basically what was the seeds of the Sword of the Apocalypse graphic novel. And it's a pretty epic fantasy vampire adventure, and it stars all of the characters that I introduced during that original Vampirotica series, but everything is kind of elevated to a whole different level. It would be the equivalent of having a TV series and then deciding to make about a $300 million motion picture. That's kind of how we look at it. Yeah.
Now, so basically, you've created a Vampirotica universe.
A Vampiress Luxura universe.
Okay.
The main difference being between the Vampiress Luxura, sort of the Apocalypse graphic novel, and the earlier stuff, is that the earlier material was geared towards a mature audience, 18 and older, but the the Sword of the Apocalypse graphic novel is aimed at about a PG-13 and older.
Okay.
So a Vampiress Luxura universe with all of the characters that she interacts with and has as allies and enemies and whatever in between.
Got it. Now, let's just step back and talk about you for a little moment. So you've clearly been doing this for some time, but how did it all start? What were your influences when you were young? How did you decide when you were in high school or even younger, doodling in your notebooks that this is what you wanted to do?
Well, my earliest memory of art, it was watching an older cousin of mine. He's about 10 years older than me. And he was at the kitchen table, and he was drawing a picture of a cowboy, like a gunfight. And he was looking at the cover of a novel, and he was drawing the novel, the cover of that novel in paper. And I was amazed by it. I was really, really just amazed by it. It's my earliest memory of discovering artwork. And as far as I can remember, I've been drawing ever since. Of course, when you get that early, you begin to discover comics. I discovered comics. I fell in love with comics, and my mother even tells a story that like when I was around 3 years old, that I used to sit on the living room floor and like flip through the comic books and look at the pages, and like relatives and friends would come by and be like, wow, he's so little, can he read? My mother's like, no, he can't read, he's just looking at the pictures, because I was just like, I'd be transfixed, page after page. So I always just instinctively got drawn to art. Later on, when I got to about fourth grade, is when I started publishing comic books. Believe it or not, when I was in fourth grade, me and a few friends of mine, we used to take like two pieces of loose leaf paper and fold them in half, and we would make these crazy little comic books. We'd put cover logos on them. We'd put a circle and put like 25 cents, and would draw these stories of comic characters. And I tell you, I'd pay $1,000 if I could find one of those things these days, but I can't. But started there, and just continued to really love and enjoy it. When I got into middle school, met one of my some more friends who also got into comics, and when we got to middle school, we got very sophisticated. We were working for the school newspaper, and we had access to the school Xerox machine. So we would draw our comics, go into the school Xerox machine, run off copies of the comic books, and staple them together, and we would try to sell them to our friends. So we got real sophisticated then.
That's funny.
and went through high school. By then, by about middle school, 8th grade, 9th grade, I was pretty much decided I'm going to be an artist. I'm going to art school. And would get involved with things like the school newspaper, school magazine, and pretty much by the time I was in 9th and 10th grade, I had heard about the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan, and decided that that's where I'm going, pretty much to the exclusion of even applying to any other school. And there was one reason alone, and that was because it was Will Eisner taught there. The creator of The Spirit, the creator of the graphic novel, period. He taught at the School of Visual Arts. And so I went there and studied under Will Eisner.
So what year did you go there?
I started SVA 82. That's when I graduated. 82 graduated high school. Went from about 82 through 86.
So I just missed you.
Yeah, you were there?
Yeah, I went to, it was 89, I think. 89 or 90.
Yeah. Great school. I mean, was a fantastic experience. It was an eye-opener for me because, when I was in high school, I was a hotshot artist, that everybody knew, wow, Kirk's great. And then you end up at SVA.
And you're like the bottom of the pile.
Everybody there, I remember going to my first painting class my freshman year, and there was a guy in my class by the name of Fred Castelluccio. And this guy walked in with these like 2 foot by 4 foot gorgeous, beautifully illustrated paintings, and I was like, wow, I got to really do some work. It's a humbling but a good experience, especially if you're passionate about art. You like, okay.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that was my experience too. I mean, I went during the time of Dorian Vallejo.
Oh.
Yeah, and even and yet he was floored by our teacher.
Right.
With Stephen Assel, for example, and a few other. Ginsberg and Max.
Oh yeah, great illustrators. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so we were all just humbled by each other, and then when we see the teachers, we're like, okay, we're nothing yet. And
Gil Stone still there when you were there?
What was his name?
Gil Stone.
Doesn't sound familiar.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
We have Marvin Madelson and a few other major artists out there. So okay, cool. Now, what things did you think you would be doing when you did go to college? Were you still thinking comics, or when you started painting, did you think, I want to do covers, or what fine tuned your direction there?
Well, I was a comic guy. I've always been a comic guy. Comics are my passion. Sequential art is my passion. But something that happened to me when I got into SVA is that I got introduced to a lot of different things: photography, sculpture. You've been there.
Oh yeah.
First year at SVA, they throw everything at you:
Hmm.
photography, sculpture, illustration, graphic design. They throw it all at you. And I remember for a short time in my first semester as a freshman, I was kind of wondering, well, should I do comics? Should I stick with comics? Should I go to illustrate? Because SVA just throws all these phenomenal illustrators at you, and they have such a high stature that if you're a person that doesn't really know what your passion is, you'll get caught up chasing things for other reasons.
Right.
You'll get caught up chasing one career because everybody says, hey, that's where all the money is.
Right.
Or you'll chase another career because, hey, that's where there's more fame and there's more attention and there's that. So I had that for a little while, and I used to keep a little artistic journal that I would write to myself, and it was bothering me for a while because it was like I was getting pulled in a different direction. And then I kind of came to the realization of, no, you know what? I'm a comic artist. I'm a sequential artist. That is the direction that I'm going in. That's what wakes me up in the morning. That's what keeps me up late at night. Storytelling, creating characters, putting it in that format is the thing that is deep in my bones. And all these other things that I learned, photography, a little bit of sculpture, a little bit of painting, some of those other things, I'll learn that. I'll let myself get exposed to it. I won't close myself off,
Hmm.
but I'll get exposed to it to the level that if I can utilize it to help me in where I'm going, which is with sequential art. And what I didn't realize at that time is I had to also developing a passion for publishing.
Okay.
And so that was my experience with that. I kind of looked at it a little bit, but then I, was able to realize, no, I know where I want to go. I know exactly what I want to do.
Cool. Now publishing. Now, if I remember back in those days, it was a very kind of closed group of places that would allow you to publish and distribute. So, what were those challenges like when you decided, okay, I'm going to publish my first book?
Well, that didn't come until well later, because what happens is I got out of SVA, and here I was. I'm basically a sequential art major. That's my direction. But I also did graphic design. I also did advertising. I did that as a backup.
Yeah, same here.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you do that which is a smart choice. Become versatile in your artistic talent. Because at that time, 1986, 87, there's two comic book companies, DC and Marvel.
Right.
There's nothing else. I mean, maybe Dark Horse is out, or a few of the independents are out, but none of them were at the level of DC or Marvel.
Yeah, because things like Image, that was like 89,
Yes,
90.
90s. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And I remember all the arguments. In fact, I was starting to work at Marvel when everything started falling apart at Marvel. And that gave the advantage to some of these
I know I had
independents.
that experience. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was horrible because I was just about to do my first painted book, and then I got dropped because everybody got fired.
Yeah. Right. Right. So what happened is, when I got out of college, there was DC, Marvel, and I'd send them some samples. Nothing happens. Fine. So now what do you do? Well, I ended up working, getting a job at a women's shoe store. And right, exactly. How does that happen? Pretty much, I go in. They were looking for a salesman. The lady, it was funny. The lady that hired me liked my handwriting, and so she hired me. What she didn't know is that my wife, which was my girlfriend at the time, filled out the application for me. So she hired me under false pretenses.
Wow. Okay.
And so I started working there and moved up the chain and became an assistant manager. Eventually became a manager. Because I had a good work ethic, and so on and so forth. And did that for a while. Still worked on my artwork. After that, I got into, I would do freelance work, and eventually got hired by a company to be their art director. That led to me I got hired by another company in their marketing department, became a marketing director for another company.
Hmm.
And it was while I was at that company that a good friend of mine told me he saw an ad in the paper for comic artists, which you know as well as I do. That's like ridiculous. You don't see ads
Yeah,
in the
that's
paper.
weird.
Yeah, that is weird. So it was a small company, and I went there, showed them my portfolio, and so they hired me. And then I was there. The one of the guys said, "Listen, we just got a question. Why do you have on a suit?" And I said, "Oh, well, I'm coming from my day job." And they're like, "Well, what do you do?" I was like, "Well, I'm a marketing director for a sportswear company." They're like, "Oh, okay." They're like, so they said, "Well, they started talking about my managerial experience," and I said, "Well, listen, we really need an editor. You think you can do that?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So they hired me, and I worked for that company for a while, and that was a very, very good experience. The company was called Personality Comics. The guy that hired me, Adam Post, that still talk to today.
That's cool.
Good buddy of mine, yeah, and a great supporter of my work. And I was with them for a while and really got into the nuts and bolts of comic publishing. Learned how to deal with the printers. Learned how to prepare books to get sent out, hire the artists, fire the artists, the whole 9 yards, everything. When I met them, we started off with it was just like two guys out of the back of a packaging store. We eventually grew to a studio of about 20 in-house artists. This is out on Long Island, New York. And that's when I really got the full immersion in the publishing and managerial end of publishing. Of creating and distributing comics. And I was with them for a while, and then I, decided to move on, and I started my own publishing company, which was Brainstorm Comics. And I would have to say it was my experience at Personality that really solidified my desires. Like, oh yeah, I've got to publish. I'm going to publish, which, if as we're talking about, is something I was doing from fourth grade with
Right.
putting the little books together and putting them out there. It is definitely hand in hand what I like to do, because if you're an artist, you take basically, if you're a comic artist in particular, there are two paths in being in the comic industry. One is working for a company that already has characters, that already has brands, that already has an established way that they do things.
Right.
And the other way is to create your own characters, create your own intellectual properties. Now, both of these paths have, potential for great rewards. They also have got potential for, great frustrations.
Mm-hmm.
Either path you choose. And you'll find that as an artist, you really, at some point, settle into what your path is going to be. You may start at one and end up at another. You may bounce between the two, but the type of individual, the type of person that you are, is what is going to determine which one of those two paths that you go. And over the long run, I know that I chose the right path.
Mm-hmm.
Because although I love Marvel characters and DC characters, and one thing that happens in working for the larger companies is that your longevity is not in your own hands.
Right. Like they always want to try out new artists and that type of stuff.
Exactly. There's it's like the NFL almost.
Oh yeah, totally.
You may have a few players who have longevity, but if you don't develop your own intellectual properties, you're not going to have the capacity to really participate in the intellectual property creation business. You have a more difficult time doing things like getting royalties. You have a more difficult time having the potential of licensing.
Mm-hmm.
and you also, to a degree, you don't control your destiny. If you are working for DC and Marvel, and you get to be one of the upper echelon artists, then of course you can call your shots. You can draw any book. You can do anything. If you're Jim Lee, you basically pick a title. You say you want to draw it. You're there. It's the equivalent of if you are Arnold Schwarzenegger. Any movie you want to make, you make, pretty much at the height of his career.
Yeah.
But if you are a fairly creative, tenacious individual that really wants to write, really wants to draw, really wants to get things out there, you might have a tough time at the bigger companies. Whereas
Right.
if you develop your own character, develop your own intellectual properties, then that property and those characters stay alive as long as you decide that they do. If you've got the energy, if you've got the time, if you've got the resource, then you can bring those characters to life, keep them alive long after the company decides that, well, this is not viable enough. You can go ahead and you can stick with it. And I think for that reason, because I took that path, is why here I am 20 years later and my Vampirus Luxura character is still alive. When I was actively publishing the Vampirotica series, there's probably about 10 to 15 guys who got started with me or did a little bit of freelance work with me, who went on to then go work for Marvel, to go work for DC. And some of them worked for a while, and then they just didn't. If there was a change, if the company changed editors or so forth, they found themselves really achieving, which for a lot of artists, which is a dream, to work for DC or Marvel.
Right.
And then depending on corporate things completely out of your hands, it goes away. And then where are you? My suggestion is to every comic artist, every writer, even if you are like, hey, I want to be working on the big characters, you should develop your own intellectual property. Develop a character, develop a story, develop something that's uniquely your own, that you can market, that you can practice, that people can begin to be known for. Frank Miller, he's known for Dark Knight, he's known for 300, he's known for Sin, but he's also known for Sin City,
Right.
for his properties. So he started in the corporate property system, but then he moved to create his own intellectual properties, and he has the fun of being able to bounce between the two when he chooses.
Now, you have created these properties. Now, can you give us a little bit of an idea of what was going through your mind when you created these characters? Are they based on somebody or a story that you might have read? Or so, give us a little bit of background on the characters that you've created in this world that you created.
Well, the Luxura character is based on sometime when I was in college. I discovered artist by the name of Alphonse Mucha, one of my big influences. And I noticed how decorative he was with hair. And I began to discover it. I would do sketches of what he would do. And then I began noticing hair on women when I'm on the train, when I'm at lunch, and I would notice, the hair on different women, and I'm sitting there drawing them. And it kind of began to plant the seeds of, I'm going to create a character where her main feature is this extremely decorative, elaborate hair to a crazy degree. And also, when I was younger, I was very much into the Edgar Rice Burroughs, John Carter, Warlord of Mars comic series that Marvel used to publish. And I was heavily influenced by Dejah Thoris, the Dejah Thoris character. And so I would have to say kind of a combination of those two is what began coming up to it. Now, around high school, I also began getting fascinated by vampires. Movies like Fright Night. And when I was around 12 years old, my mother took me to see Dracula on Broadway.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like mesmerized by it. And, so as it was going on, I kind of had that fascination and that influence there. But my first character that I attempted to get published was my character called Rescue Man, which he's got, his armor, a shield, and sword. And while I was working for Personality Comics, I actually was able to convince them to publish my first issue as a creator-owned property, which they did.
Hmm.
Sales were horrible. Sales were terrible. And in my mind, I just knew that this was going to be a hit. This is going to be fantastic. There's going to be a movie. There's going to be toys. I'm doing my best work. Everything in this is going to be fantastic. And it barely made enough to pay for the print run.
Wow.
And that was one of the best lessons I learned in publishing as being an entrepreneur. And that is, you can have your passion and be all into something that you're working on. But ultimately, it's the marketplace that decides if what you've created is commercially viable. Not if it's good or if it's bad, but if it's commercially viable.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I went and I launched Brainstorm Comics and started publishing my own work, I had a goal. I want to make a commercially viable project. I want to make a commercially viable property. I want to make something that sells. Now, I'm not just going to purely chase the sales. I'm going to put into there a lot of what I know about entertainment, a lot of what I know about storytelling, but I want a property that will sell. And so I published a few different things. We had some successes, we had some failures, and then finally when I looked around at the industry and I discovered that there were almost no vampire comics. Because if anybody understands the solicitation process about in publishing in comic stores, you work about 4 to 6 months ahead. So at the point when I was looking through the Diamond Previews and the Capital Advance Comics, these are the distributors to the comic industry, I was looking through and there were like pretty much no vampire comics. There was definitely no vampire anthologies. So I said, okay, well, to try to do a superhero comic, I'm going to end up competing with Marvel and DC and at that time Image. So I'm Kirk Lindo. It's me. My wife is helping me. I don't have the resources to take on them. But I could create something that's a little unique, something that's a little different. So that's what I did. I gave it a shot. And that was like lightning in a bottle. The first issue sold really well. I printed about 6,000 copies of Vampirotica #1, sold out of those. The book had to go to a second printing. Went to a second printing, sold out of those. I actually got more orders from the distributors for copies of #1, and I told them I don't have any more. I said I can do a third printing and ship these to you. And they said, okay, well, we'll take them, but we'll only take them on a returnable basis since they're not first printings. So I went ahead, did the third printing, shipped it to them. Not a single one came back. They
Awesome.
said every single one, and eventually sold out of the third printing. The second issue had to go to a second printing. We did a first, that sold out. We did a second printing. By the time I got to the third issue, I was smart enough to print enough that we didn't have to do that anymore. So I knew we had something that was commercially viable. And when you have something that worked commercially, that brings you in the revenue, now you can begin to use all of those skills that you tried to build up in art school, that you build up through learning and studying, watching movies, to create compelling characters and get people interested. And right around that time, I had the good fortune of not too long after I published Vampirotica #1, the quote unquote bad girl craze took on in the 90s,
Mm-hmm.
which I was one of the books that was ahead of it.
Right.
Because the bad girl genre officially kind of got started in sometime around the middle to the end of 1994. And that's when like Lady Death came out, and then Lady Death was already in the Evil Ernie comics, but the Lady Death #1, when she had her own series, that one actually came out after mine. And then Vengeance of Vampirella, which was the resurgence of the Vampirella comic, and they came out. So we were kind of a little bit ahead of that. And then when all those books came out and the marketplace really kind of opened up to those, mine was one of the books that got snapped up in that along with it. So we had the good fortune that my first issue kind of was out there by itself. But by the time I got to the third and the fourth, these other books had come out that had people looking for that type of material. So we were able to settle right in there.
That's
and,
cool.
It worked out well. Yeah.
Now I remember. Yeah, I remember things like Razor and
Right. Yeah. Razor
She.
actually came out before my book.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Razor actually came out before mine.
And then you had She and
Yeah.
but I know at some point you kind of teamed up with a few of those.
Yeah, we had a few crossovers. Back in those days, about I would say like between '95 to '97, we all knew each other.
Right.
We were all on the convention circuit.
Right.
We would all go. We'd hang out. After the cons and so on and so forth. So we all knew each other, and Everett and I became really great lifelong friends, and Brian and I good pals. So we would talk to each other like, hey, let's do a crossover. Let's do this. Mike Wilfer, who did a comic book called Widow, and he's also back into publishing again. So we would say, hey, let's do a crossover, and it was that simple. We would run into each other at a convention, and it was fun. We had a good time doing it.
All right. So at some point you stopped.
Right.
So is that what caused that kind of decision?
That decision was thrust upon me by what people don't know about now. But there was something called the distributor wars that was going on in the '90s in the comic industry. And basically, what happened is this: is when I published my first issue, there was about 6 or 7 comic distributors. There was the biggest comic distributor, which was Diamond. There was the second biggest, which was Capital. There was the third biggest, which was Heroes World. And then there was a few other smaller distributors. So what would happen is every month we would get orders for our books from all of these various distributors. And, we would ship them out and so forth. What happened is at that time, Marvel bought Heroes World, the third largest distributor. And they pulled their products from Diamond and from Capital and all of the other distributors and said, we now exclusively only distribute through Heroes World. And that touched off the distributor wars. What happened is pretty much every other small distributor went out of business literally overnight. What you were left with 3 distribution companies: Diamond, Capital, and Heroes World. Marvel went exclusive and created Heroes World. DC went exclusive with Diamond, and so they all were distributed there. DC ended up eventually buying Diamond, if I'm not mistaken. And then Capital City was left with neither Marvel nor DC to distribute, and they eventually went out of business. What happened, basically simple, Capital City, I shipped them literally, tens of thousands of dollars worth of books that they never paid for. Great people, they're wonderful folks, but the forces in the marketplace just literally wiped them out. So we ended up with only one distributor to go to, which was Diamond. Now, if you went back to 1994 or 1992 and you looked at a copy of the Diamond Previews, the comic catalog, what you'd find is that all of the books were in alphabetical order.
Right.
You open up and there's A, B, C. When you get to D, there's DC. You go down, you get to M, there's Marvel, and the book was in alphabetical order. What happened is after the distributor wars, a pecking order was established. When you pick up a copy of Diamond Previews now, in the front of the book is DC and Marvel and all of the bigger companies, and all of the smaller companies are now sent to the back. It wasn't like that when I started publishing. I was in Brainstorm Comics. You went to the B section, there I was. So basically what happens is the Diamond, as the sole distributor, they now they stack the playing deck. Plain and simple. They stack the deck in favor of the largest companies, and all of the smaller companies were put into the back section of the book. And directly after this happened, the sales of my books just began to decline. Pretty much everyone else Lady Death stopped publishing under their own. I stopped, all of the smaller guys like me who are publishing and doing very well. I think London Knight, which is Everett Hartsoe, does Razor. He had a staff, I think, of about maybe 9 or 10 people. I had a staff of about 5. I know Brian had a big staff over at Chaos Comics. And that, along with other forces, the rise of video games started right around 95. So where the place where you got your kind of costumed action adventure, for people, for certain people was comics, now there was video games.
Yeah.
I remember around 96 is when I think, or 95 is when the first PlayStation came out. And video consoling changed. And there were all of these forces. And the sales of our books they began to decline. They just kept going down and down and down. And no matter what I did, there was, nothing. Full page advertising, this and that. If you went through the previews, you didn't even get to my books until you went through probably about 3/4 of it. By then, I would imagine retailers have already ordered their main stuff and the buying decision changed. So, basically Diamond Distribution stacked the deck in favor of the bigger companies, which I'm sure was nothing personal. It was just to their advantage. And it was not in our favor. And the sales declined to a point where I said, you know what, that's it, I'm out. I'm going to give it right, because as you go on, when you have less resources to work with, the quality of your product is less. Earlier on, I was able to print on better quality paper, but as time went on, I had to, go to lesser quality paper.
Right.
And I didn't want to turn my books into trash. So I had a decision, just go ahead and try to publish and eke out, whatever I can, or I could cease publication and just leave it at that. I published some really good comics with some really good stories, and I wasn't going to turn that into garbage. So I stopped publishing, got into the printing business, and still did some comics on the side. And that was that. That's what got me out of actively publishing comics. I published my last book through the Diamond publishing system in, I think it was about 2004.
Got it. Now, so this happens, you started your printing company. What were the conversations like when you were talking to your buddies who used to publish as well? I picture a bunch of guys sitting at the bar, a bunch of beers and just, woe is me, that type of thing.
Nah, not the guys I know, not these guys, not Brian Polito, not Everett Hartsoe, not me. Nah, we were like, man, this sucks, but we're the type of guys who we've got a passion for what we do, so we'll take a break. But not, I wouldn't say woe is me, more of
what was the battle plan, basically?
The battle plan at that time was get out.
Right, okay.
This ship is sinking for us. Get out. I believe Brian went on to Lady Death Lady Death has achieved such high levels of success that it ended up getting published by a company called CrossGen.
Okay.
Who they eventually went out of business. And then it went over to, I think, Avatar and then a few others. And then finally now Brian has Lady Death back and he's publishing his own stuff again. So
what's bringing that resurgence? Digital?
Well, I'll tell you, the resurgence in me was very simple. I had got out in 2004, got into the printing business. I still did comics. I still did a lot of artwork. I did commissions for people. And we sold a lot of backstock. Right around that time, when I was about to get out, around 1999 is when eBay started. eBay kind of came into existence. And from day one on eBay, there were my comics on there. And from 1999 till today, if you go on eBay and search Vampirotica or Vampirus Luxura, you're going to get 100 books that pop up, which it's something that makes me feel really good because it's a testament to the quality of the work we did and the books that we did, because they still sell to this day. And so we sold there while I was doing my printing business. And what began to happen is digital appeared on the horizon, like just a little blip out there somewhere in the universe. I got contacted by a company sometime around 2006, and they wanted to begin selling digital versions of my comics. And I'm like, who's going to buy digital versions? Whatever. But, I wasn't really doing too much. I still owned all the intellectual properties, which was a good thing. I didn't sell it off to anyone else. So we made the contracts, and they said, okay, we're going to put, your books on our system. So I tested it out. I provided them with two of my books, like Vampirotica #1 and #2. I said, okay, we can test these out, because I established the contract so that I could decide how many go there, how many don't. So I tried those two. And like about a month later, an email shows up with a royalty report that the books were selling. And I was like, wow. I was like, how about that? Now, to me, that was amazing, because something that I had put together, this is 2004, something I put together and published 10, 11 years ago, was now generating revenue. And so basically after that, I then put every book I had into that system. And this was only when PDF was being distributed around the internet.
Got it.
What then came is the invention of the iPad, and then the Kindle. And so now the idea of digital reading on these readers started to sprout up. And the thing that first made me realize that this work had even a greater life was that I was selling digital copies of the comics that we produced. And some months, a couple hundred of them. It was, I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so we did that, and that just kind of came along. At the time, I didn't have any ideas for anything new just yet. And but what happened along the way is my oldest son, Kirk II, we don't call him Kirk Jr. He calls himself Kirk II. So no Kirk Jr. for him. It's Kirk II. You have to remember, he was about 10 or 11 years old, 12 years old when I was doing conventions. He used to come around with me and hang out. We used to bring him around. One of the comics I published was even an idea of his. So around this time, by around 09, he's older now. He's grown. He's a grown man. And we were having a conversation around 2000, I think it was 2009, because Michael Jackson had just died. And he called me up because he said, Dad, I tell my friends how Michael Jackson's costume designer designed your Luxura costume for Julie Strain. Give you 15 seconds worth of background. Back in around 99, we hired model Julie Strain to portray the Luxura character.
I remember that.
We met her. I told her I was looking for a costume designer. She said, I know a guy. His name's Michael Bush. Turns out he's a costume designer for Michael Jackson. And he created the Luxura costume that we used in the photo shoots. And so he's like, Dad, I bet, I tell my friends how, Michael Jackson's costume designer, and they don't believe me. I said, yeah, I know. And he said, Dad, you really need to do some new stories with the characters. You created some great characters, and I actually have some ideas. I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. I was like, well, let's get together and talk about it. So what we did is every Saturday morning, really early, he and I would grab coffee and get together, and we started hashing out who these characters are, what the basic crux of them are, and how they oppose with each other. And so we started recording that, and we did this for a few months. I think we ended up with about 10 or 11 hours of recordings, and by the time we were done, we had laid down the basic structure for the graphic novel, Sword of the Apocalypse. And I didn't even decide to get back into comics yet. I just decided that I'm going to do this graphic novel. And so what happened is I had started writing, and I wrote the entire graphic novel, 660 pages. Before I even picked up a pen, before anything, I said, no. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write the story. Because my son said something. He said, Dad, we could do anything with this story. He said, because you've got $100 million budget in your right hand. He's like, anything you dream up, you can make. If it's an army, if it's spaceships, anything.
He's smart.
Yeah,
Smart
right.
guy.
Hey, my son is brilliant. All my kids are brilliant.
$100 million in your hand. I like
In
that.
your right hand, you have $100 million budget. He said, so let's just come up with some of the most amazing things we could think of for a story and do it and draw it and make it. So basically that's what we did. So with that kind of nudge, I said, my approach to this is going to be more like making $100 million movie. So I decided the first thing is I'm going to write the script, because that's how movies start.
Right.
You got ideas, you got all this. So I wrote the entire script. As a matter of fact, hang on, hold on.
We're going to get a little exclusive peek, I think.
And this is it. The entire script. The whole thing.
Wow.
Right. So wrote that. Took me about off and on. What happened is I would wake up at about 4:30, 5 o'clock every morning and start writing, and try to write for at least an hour every day. Initial plot, first draft, final draft ended up taking me about 18 months doing it that way, because I had my print business full-time job to do. So I did that and finished it. And when I wrote it, I was like, wow, that's really the best thing I've ever written. It really is. I was like, I didn't even know I could write this well. I mean, so hopefully it turns out that way when you all read this thing. But it was really at the level that I always dreamed of creating at as an artist. And so once I did that, I said, okay, well, I'm going to continue this. So the next thing I did is when you make a movie, the first thing you do is you write a script. The second thing is you do storyboards. So that's what I did. I did the thumbnails. Now, when you're doing comics, you don't do storyboards, you do thumbnails. Right. So I went ahead and I thumbnailed the entire 660 pages. And that's too big. That's a pile that's like, this huge. I can't bring that out to show you. So I did that. And right around the time when I had completed that is when I discovered Kickstarter. I had heard about this thing called Kickstarter. And I was looking around on it. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. What is it? And it was, first of all, it was all independent comics in the comic section. And people who are working on projects were creating comics and doing projects. And so I was like, okay, I want to test this out. So what I did was I decided that I would do a chapter one. The chapter one of the graphic novel is very short. It's kind of like a teaser. And so I decided to do a Kickstarter for a 32-page book. It would be the first chapter of the graphic novel. It would also have some concept sketches. It would have some artwork behind the scenes and some information about the characters and things like that. And I figured I'd give it a try. And so I hadn't been in comics. I didn't have an active website. There was kind of really nothing going on. I was out of the industry for at least close to about 10 years.
It's amazing how much has changed since then.
Yeah, well, I mean, the changes are phenomenal. And so I said, okay, well, listen, I'm going to give it a shot. I'll put it up there, and listen, what happens happens. So I launched the first Kickstarter, and I had broken it down to the bare minimum that I needed to be able to deliver the stuff, which is, okay, the goal that I set for the Kickstarter was not really to even put any profit in my pocket whatsoever. It was just, here's how much I need to print and ship this stuff. And if at the end of the day I end up with zero, so be it. But at least I can get this out there, and I can plant the initial seed to getting this out there. And we ended up beating the goal by over 300%, which was my initial goal was like $1,500. We ended up doing over $5,000.
Nice. Okay.
And I just didn't know anything about it, was just giving it a shot. And I began to get a lot of email from people who, I remember your character. Great to see that you're getting back into this. I love Luxura. It's great to see her coming back. And it was it was the catalyst that really brought me back into wanting to actively publish again. It was, I mean, it was fantastic. People would back, they would share, they would like, they would talk about it. A few websites picked up, that the character was coming back, and it was a great experience. We printed the books. We actually shipped them ahead of schedule, and I got some great comments listed on the Kickstarter from people. This is fantastic. This is great. Glad to see you're back. Want to see, more of what you're doing with this. It's great to see Luxura. And after that happened, the publisher in me immediately said, hey, we got more stuff, And I realized I think that was in 2012 or 2013 when we did the first one. So I knew that we were coming up on the 20th anniversary of the first appearance of Luxura in Vampirotica #1, which was 2014. So I said, okay, tell you what, I'm going to try to put all of the Luxura stories back into print. So I created 8 volumes, 8-volume set of Luxura stories, which collects all the ones I did, all the other great artists that I worked with that did Luxura stories for me. And so we did another Kickstarter. By this time, I got a little more familiar with print on demand, which, if you know, print on demand is if you need 1 copy, you print
Right.
1 copy. If you need 10, you print 10. So I'd figured out that if I did this set of 8 books, I was like, okay, so about how much would I need just to, if I hit like a bare minimum? And I came up with the number. It would only take about $600 because I could use print on demand. There's a company called Lulu, Lulu.com. That's an excellent print on demand service. And I'd figured it out that I could do a set of soft covers and hard covers and cover the cost of shipping and everything else for roughly, it would be $600. So I launched that Kickstarter and I set the goal at $600. And it ended up doing over $12,000.
Nice.
And I was able to ship all the books. I actually, was able to remaster some of them, rescan, ship them, printed extra copies, and that, those 2 things were the catalyst that really got me back into publishing. And you can build an audience, and you can sell your books, and enjoy what the heck you're doing in comics and artwork.
Awesome. Okay, now, that is kind of like a story that I've been following in respect to some of the shows that I do, where I cover independent musicians and filmmakers, and the conversation is always around how the digital world is changing the distribution and everything. So I understand that. But what's your next project? What's your next thing?
My next step is really just a progression of what I already started. Basically, what happened is after the first Kickstarter was successful, I sat down and I said, okay, so you now have an opportunity to really do the things that you want to do. What are you going to do? So what I said was, okay, I'm going to really get back into publishing full-fledged. And I laid out. Yeah, you had mentioned before how your show, you talk a lot with musicians and how how they promote and the digital advantages that musicians have had. I've always looked at musicians and the process of becoming a successful musician as a great template that comic artists should follow. Because I'll tell you, comic artists and some comic creators, they have a skewed look at how they pursue their career. If you're a musician, probably the early part of your career, you're going around everywhere singing for free. Right? Hey, can you sing at our church? Can you sing at our heart? And because you want to get out there, you're doing it for the love, the passion, and the devotion of what you're doing. What happens a lot of time in the comic industries is comic artists hear the stories of how this guy sold 1 million comics, and this guy makes $400 a page, and this girl makes $300 a page coloring, and so on and so forth. And then you begin to get into a mindset that, well, my work is worth this, my work is worth that, so you should pay me that.
Mm-hmm.
Thing that I learned early in the industry is your work is worth what the market is willing to pay for it. So don't ever get upset if you're early in your career and you are trying to get out there and trying to get noticed, and you're doing work for little pay, in some cases no pay. My first published work, which wasn't in comics, was something like, I think, about 3 or 4 magazine articles, which I did for free. I did for free in order to get them published. Comic artists who develop the mindset early in their career that, well, listen, my work is just as good as whoever's, so you've got to pay me that, or you got to pay me what Marvel pays, or pays this or that. You're doing yourself a disservice. You're killing your opportunities, because what you have to do when you're early in your career, the most important thing you to do is to do what a musician does. Get out there. Let people hear you. Get out. Musicians let people hear their talent. They let people experience their talent. At one point, Mariah Carey wasn't Mariah Carey. She was just some really talented girl singing anywhere and everywhere that she could. And I'm sure she wasn't doing, hey, can you come and sing at my birthday party or sing at our church? It's like, well, what's your church paying? No, they went there and they sang. They got their product out there for people to see. Because if you're an artist without an audience and without a customer base, then you're just a hobbyist. You're a hobbyist. And if you want to make that change from having a hobby to having a profession, then earlier in career and sometimes later in your career, you may have to do work that is technically at the same level as someone who is incredibly successful. But you got to get out there so the marketplace wants you. If anybody knows the career of John Travolta, John Travolta was a big deal back in the 70s.
Right.
When he was doing Saturday Night Fever and Welcome Back, Kotter. He was the man. Then all of a sudden he got somewhere into the 80s where all he was in that show with the talking baby. And that was the most work he was getting. And
yes,
then
yes.
along came Pulp Fiction. And John Travolta did Pulp Fiction way below what he might normally get as an actor, but it was a great part, and he knew it. And he took that part, and he got out there. And John Travolta's career after Pulp Fiction, he turned into like just a megastar. And we are in the creative business, music, art, acting, and it's tough. And the number one thing that you have to do is you got to get your work out there. So my advice would be to some artists is that don't set yourself this bar of you have to get this or you won't do it. Take a good look at the project. Is the project worth it? Is it worth working on? Are you going to get some exposure? Are you going to get the opportunity to do the type of work that you're doing? Because I don't get paid for any of the work that I've done. If you can understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, totally.
I don't get paid for any of the work I've done. When I write a 600-page graphic novel, no one paid me. When I started Brainstorm Comics, no one was paying me. No one was paying me for that work. No one was paying me to create Luxura. No one was paying me for all of that. I did all of that work for free and put it out there in the marketplace for people to see and let the marketplace decide if this commercial property is viable. So you really have to have a passion and a devotion to what you're doing to make it good and to sell it. And if a lot of artists kind of fine tune their channel a little bit to where they think a little bit more like musicians and in some cases actors, you'll find that you're going to open up greater opportunities for your art and for your art career if you do that.
Awesome. All right, Kirk. Well, I think that's going to end our episode there. But
I don't ramble on, right?
No, you're great. You're great. But I do want to let people have an opportunity to follow you and find you and all that. So if you could let them know how they can find you now that you've become the master of social media.
Not that far yet, but I'm getting there. Facebook. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. My main website is vampirousluxura.com. And that's where I'm publishing the individual panels to the Sword of the Apocalypse graphic novel. And if you search Facebook for Vampirous Luxura or Kirk Lindo, my sites will pop up, and you can see what I'm working on.
Sweet. All right. Well, thank you again, Kirk, and thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, because he's got some amazing stories, and he's also putting out some great products. So make sure you follow him. And we'll be having more artists and more entertainment to have on the Lounge Network.com, as well as Artist Alley, which is inside of the Lounge Network.com. So thanks a lot. My name is Carlos Phoenix. You can follow me at Carlos Phoenix on Twitter, on Facebook, or you can also follow the Lounge at Real TLN on Twitter. All right, guys. Thank you so much, and thank you again, Kirk.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, man. Love your show.
Thank you.